Delego, you're being placed under arrest for conspiracy to smuggle controlled merchandise for federal court.
I don't... What? I'm the officer. I work there. You're the wrong guy.
That man in the doorway, still wearing his own agency's shirt at the moment of his arrest, is not Rafael Delgado. His name is Marcus Trevino, Senior CBP Import Specialist, 14-year federal employee at the Laredo Port of Entry, Texas. For over a decade, this man stood at one of the busiest commercial border crossings in the entire United States, deciding what came through and what didn't. He was trusted, he was respected, he was considered one of the best in the building. He was also secretly running his own import business on the side, moving $4.2 million in undeclared, duty-evaded goods straight through the same port he was paid to protect. 11 federal charges, a maximum sentence of 47 years. And the thing that brought it all crashing down? It wasn't a federal audit. It wasn't a tip from a rival. It wasn't even a lucky traffic stop. It was his son's 6th grade science fair project. Here's a question before we go any further. If the person whose whole job was catching smugglers turned out to be the smuggler, how would you ever know? Drop your answer in the comments below. On this channel, we break down real federal cases step by step. The lies people told, the systems they broke moment everything fell apart. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Because this case has a twist that nobody, not the agency, not his co-workers, not even his own family, saw coming. Marcus Trevino was born in Eagle Pass, Texas in 1979. If you've never been to Eagle Pass, here's what you need to know. It's a small border town where the economy runs on exactly one thing: the international bridge connecting Texas to Mexico. That bridge wasn't just a road, it was the town's heartbeat. Every job, every business, every family in that town was connected to what crossed it. His father, Ernesto Trevino, worked as a truck dispatcher for a freight company that moved produce back and forth across the border. His mother, Catalina, ran a small notary and customs paperwork service out of their garage. She helped families and small businesses fill out the official forms needed to move goods through customs legally. It wasn't a big operation. It was a folding table, a rubber stamp, and a steady stream of neighbors who needed help with paperwork they didn't understand. Marcus understood it before most adults did. By the time he was 9 years old, he was sitting at that folding table, stamping carbon copies of commercial invoices. By 12, he knew the difference between a CF-7512 and a CF-3461, two specific government transit forms that most professional brokers regularly mixed up. He wasn't learning this in school. He was learning it at home, just by being present, just by paying attention. His father started calling him La Computadora, the computer, because once Marcus saw a system, he didn't forget it. His 8th grade geography teacher, Ms. Villanueva, noticed the same thing. On his report card, she wrote, "Marcus has an unusual ability to see patterns in systems other students treat as random." His mother cut that line out and framed it. She hung it in the hallway. She had no idea how right Ms. Villanueva was. Marcus graduated from Texas A&M International University in 2001 with a degree in supply chain management. On the same week he finished his final exams, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, was holding a recruiting fair right there on campus. He walked in, sat down, and within 90 days, he had a federal job offer in his hands. He went back to Laredo, the bigger border city just up the road from where he grew up, and he reported for duty at the World Trade Bridge, the busiest commercial land port in the entire United States. Think about that for a second. His father spent 30 years driving trucks up to that bridge, waiting for someone on the other side to wave him through. Now Marcus Trevino was that someone. He was the one behind the desk. He was the one reading the manifests, checking the forms, and deciding what got through. He knew that system better than almost anyone alive. And in about 14 years, he would use every single thing he knew to take it apart from the inside. From the very first day Marcus Trevino walked into the Laredo Port of Entry, it was clear he wasn't like the other new hires. Most fresh recruits spent their first year just trying to keep up, learning the forms, the systems, the rhythm of a port that never truly stopped moving. Trevino didn't need that adjustment period. He already spoke the language. He'd been speaking it since he was 9 years old at his mother's folding table. While his peers were still memorizing procedure, he was already spotting things that didn't look right. His first supervisor, Port Director Alan Kessler, put it in writing during a 2004 performance review. He noted that Trevino had an instinctive read on commercial manifests that takes most inspectors a decade to develop. 3 years on the job. A decade's worth of instinct. That line alone tells you everything about how fast Marcus Trevino was moving. By 2007, he'd been promoted to Import Specialist GS11. That title matters, so let's be clear about what it means. A GS11 Import Specialist at the World Trade Bridge had the authority to approve shipments, flag them for review, or hold them for physical inspection. Over $300 billion in trade moved through that port every single year. Trevino was one of the people deciding what touched American soil and what didn't. His specialty was electronics and consumer goods, and this is where it gets important. Electronics and consumer goods are the hardest product categories to value accurately. A shipping container full of apples has a fairly predictable price range. A container full of circuit boards, phone accessories, or LED components, the declared value can be almost anything the importer writes down. Verifying it requires expertise, real expertise, the kind that takes years to build. Marcus Trevino had it, and everyone around him knew it. By 2012, he was a senior import specialist. He was running training sessions, teaching newer agents how to read a manifest the way he did. He was put forward for a supervisory promotion twice. His colleagues, when asked about him later by investigators, all used the same kind of language. Meticulous, quiet, focused. The one you called when a manifest didn't add up. That last part is worth sitting with for a moment. When something looked wrong on paper, when the numbers felt off, when a shipment didn't quite make sense, Marcus Trevino was the person his colleagues brought it to. He was the expert. He was the trusted one. If he looked at a document and said it was fine, that was the end of the conversation. Nobody questioned him. Why would they? His record was spotless. His reputation was built on catching exactly the kind of fraud he was quietly committing. He wasn't just inside the system. He was the system. And he had been running his shadow operation for 2 years before anyone even thought to look. Before we get to how Marcus Trevino built his operation, we need to slow down and look at the system he was working inside. Because the fraud didn't just happen because of who Trevino was. It happened because of how the system was built. And once you see the gaps, you'll understand why nobody caught it for so long. Here's how commercial customs clearance works at a port like Laredo. When a shipment arrives, the importer files entry documents electronically through CBP's system, called the Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE. An import specialist reviews those documents and assigns one of 3 flags. Green means the shipment passes straight through. Yellow means the paperwork gets a closer look. Red means the physical goods get pulled and examined. Simple enough, but here's where it starts to crack. Import specialists had a significant amount of personal judgment when it came to green lane approvals, especially for importers who had clean histories and came through regularly. The system was designed that way on purpose. Laredo processes over 10,000 commercial entries every single week. If agents physically examined more than 3 to 5% of those shipments, the entire port would grind to a halt. Billions of dollars in trade would back up at the bridge. The system needed to move fast, and moving fast meant trusting people. A specialist like Trevino could consistently approve shipments from the same importers week after week without triggering a single alarm, because to the system, that consistency looked exactly like good, competent work. There was no flag for this officer keeps approving the same companies. That just looked like experience. That was the first gap. The second gap was in how declared values were checked. When an importer writes down what their goods are worth, someone has to decide whether that number is believable. For electronics and consumer goods, Trevino's specialty, that job fell almost entirely on the specialist's personal knowledge. There was no automated cross-reference pulling live market prices. There was no second opinion required. Trevino said the number looked right. That was enough, because he was the expert, and everyone treated him like one. That was the second gap. But the third gap, This is the one that should make you stop and stare at the ceiling for a second. CBP's internal audit system tracked suspicious patterns by importer. It was looking for shippers who triggered too many flags or whose declared values kept shifting. What it was not doing was tracking patterns by approving officer. Nobody was running the simple query: which specialist has approved the highest number of entries from the same small group of companies? That question was never asked, not once in 14 years. The system was built on trust. Trust in its importers, trust in its data, and most of all, trust in its own people. That trust wasn't a flaw exactly, it was a design choice, but it was load-bearing. The whole structure rested on it. And Marcus Trevino had spent 14 years learning exactly where to push. The line Marcus Trevino crossed wasn't a line he stumbled into. It was one he stood at for a while first, looking at his life, looking at his bills, looking at his daughter, and then stepped over deliberately. It was March 2015. His daughter had recently been diagnosed with a chronic illness. The treatment she needed was ongoing, expensive, and only partially covered by his federal health insurance. His wife had left her job to stay home and manage their daughter's care full-time. The financial pressure that followed was all documented later in court. Credit card statements maxed out, a second mortgage application that came back denied, a federal salary that, on paper, looked stable, but in reality wasn't close to enough. He didn't go searching for a way out. The way out came looking for him. Rodrigo Mena was a mid-level import broker working out of Nuevo Laredo, the Mexican side of the border, directly across from where Trevino spent his days. Mena worked with a network of electronics distributors, moving Chinese consumer goods through Mexico and into the United States. He was good at his job, and for 2 full years before he ever said a word to Trevino, he had been quietly studying Trevino's approval patterns, watching which shipments he flagged, which ones he passed, how he moved, how he thought. By the time Mena made his approach, he already knew exactly what Marcus Trevino could do for him. The first arrangement was almost embarrassingly simple. Trevino would approve shipments with declared values that had been artificially pushed down, sometimes by 60 to 80% below their real worth. Lower declared value meant lower import duties owed. Mena's clients saved enormous amounts of money, and in return, Mena deposited cash payments into a business account Trevino had quietly set up under the name Trevi Consulting LLC, a registered Texas company whose official purpose was listed as Customs Compliance Training. The first payment was $8,400. That was the first green light, and once it was on, it never turned off. By 2017, the operation had grown into something far bigger than a side arrangement. Trevino wasn't just approving undervalued shipments anymore. He was sourcing his own electronics directly from 3 Chinese suppliers, routing them through a shell importer that Mena controlled, and then personally approving his own entries at the port. He was the importer, the broker's silent partner, and the federal officer signing off on the paperwork, all at the same time. At its peak, between 2018 and 2020, the operation involved 14 active shell companies, 3 overseas supplier relationships, an estimated $4.2 million in goods moved through the port, $890,000 in duties deliberately avoided, personal profit after costs of approximately $1.6 million, filtered through cash, cryptocurrency, and a series of home renovation invoices that existed mostly on paper. His daughter's medical bills were paid in full. So was a lake house in Zapata County, purchased in cash. Cases like this don't just matter because someone got caught. They matter because the system didn't catch him. A child did. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now and hit the bell, because the next chapter is where this story takes a turn that will genuinely make your jaw drop. It didn't end with a federal audit. It didn't end with a whistleblower inside the agency. It didn't end with a sophisticated financial investigation or an algorithm that finally caught an anomaly in the data. It ended with a poster board and a 12-year-old who just wanted a good grade. In October 2020, Dylan Trevino, Marcus's son, a 6th grader at Cigarroa Middle School in Laredo, submitted his science fair project. He'd chosen his own family as the subject. The title, written in neat marker at the top of his display board, was How Do Businesses Make Money? A Study of My Family's Company. Dylan had found the documents on the shared family computer while doing homework one evening. Invoices, wire transfer confirmations, emails from overseas suppliers. He didn't know what most of it meant, but he knew his dad ran a consulting business, and he was proud of that. So he printed the documents out, organized them neatly, and built his project around them. He thought he was honoring his father's work. He had no idea what he was actually holding. His science teacher, Mrs. Flores, knew something was wrong the moment she looked at the board. The documents showed a small Texas consulting company receiving payments from multiple foreign businesses, and the amounts were nowhere near what any consulting service should be pulling in. One invoice alone listed a payment of $214,000 from a Hong Kong registered trading company, with the description listed simply as advisory services rendered. Mrs. Flores didn't say a word to Dylan. She didn't want to alarm him. Instead, she quietly photographed every document on that poster board and contacted the school counselor. The counselor called the Laredo Police Department. The police forwarded the materials to Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, within 48 hours. HSI pulled the full financial records for Trevino Consulting LLC. What they found matched Dylan's documents exactly, and then kept going far beyond anything on that poster board. Investigators executed a search warrant on Trevino's home. In his office, sitting on a shelf between two binders, they found a spiral-bound green ledger. Inside it, in Marcus Trevino's own handwriting, were 38 months of transactions, dates, shipment codes, payment amounts, and one column running down the right side of every page labeled with a single letter M. Investigators later confirmed it stood for MENA. Every entry. His own hand, his own records. They also pulled his phone. In August 2019, Trevino had sent Rodrigo Mena a text message that read, "Container 7 clear to 800, no flags, standard split." Mena replied, "Smooth, same next week." That was it. That was the whole operation, summarized in 2 lines. 14 years of access, 14 years of trust, 14 years of an internal audit system that never once asked the right question about its own employee. A 6th grader's homework assignment found in 4 days what the entire institution missed for over a decade. It was 6:14 in the morning on November 3rd, 2020, when the task force vehicles pulled up outside the beige Colonial on the quiet Laredo street. We've already seen how that door opened. We've already seen the confusion on Trevino's face, the wrong name, the protest. But here's what the body cam footage captured after the freeze frame. When the handcuffs went on, Marcus Trevino went quiet. Completely quiet. The man who had talked his way through 14 years of inspections, approvals, and federal evaluations had nothing left to say. His wife appeared at the top of the stairs behind him, still in her nightclothes, holding their daughter's hand. Neither of them moved. They just watched. His federal employee ID badge was still clipped to the collar of his CBP polo. He'd been getting ready for an early shift. Before he asked for a lawyer, he said one thing. It was recorded clearly on the body cam audio. He looked at the agents and said, "My son didn't know anything. I need you to know that." Those were his last words as a free man. He was charged with 11 federal counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States, smuggling goods into the country, money laundering, and making false statements to federal agents. His defense team fought hard in the early stages, filing 3 separate motions to have the evidence thrown out, arguing that the school documents Dylan brought to the science fair had been obtained improperly. All 3 motions were denied. In September 2021, Trevino took a plea deal. He pled guilty to 4 of the 11 counts in exchange for full cooperation against Rodrigo Mena and the overseas supplier network. At sentencing, the judge looked down from the bench and said, "You spent 14 years as the last line of defense for this country's commercial border, and you turned that position into a private toll booth. The betrayal here is institutional and personal. 11 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. The lake house was seized. The $1.6 million in identified profits was forfeited. Trevino Consulting LLC was dissolved. Rodrigo Mena was extradited from Mexico in 2022 and is currently awaiting trial. The 3 Chinese suppliers were referred to international enforcement partners, CBP, in the months following the arrest, finally ran the query nobody had run for 14 years, checking import specialist approval patterns across every Texas land port. Within 6 months, they identified 2 additional anomalies at separate ports. Both cases are still under active investigation. The lake house in Zapata County was sold at federal auction in 2022. The buyer gutted the interior down to the walls. The dock out back is still standing. And Dylan Trevino's science fair project? It earned a B+. Mrs. Flores gave him partial credit. The financial documents were real, she noted, but he hadn't cited his sources properly. A man who spent 14 years catching smugglers was taken down by his kids' homework. The system never saw it coming. A 6th grader did. If you want to see the case where an entire city council was brought down by a single parking ticket database, that one's next. Link is on the screen right now. See you there.